Who's the welterweight GOAT? Kamaru Usman or GSP? This has been a debate that's been going on for years now, but it recently has been making headlines because Dana White did a press conference with Kamaru Usman, where he says that Kamaru Usman is the welterweight GOAT. And listen, I'm a GSP kid. I grew up watching the sport, and I grew up watching the era of GSP and what that reign was like. And in my mind, GSP is the second best or the best MMA fighter of all time. I will say that. He is Canada's saving grace. He really is. Canada's kind of just not a very talented division when it comes, not talented country when it comes to combat sports, unless we're talking about GSP. Bro, he carries your entire country. But then I will give Kamaru Usman his flowers, but there's also some complaints that I do have. I think GSP's era in talent was stacked for that time and is comparable to what welterweight is in the current standing. Let's go over Kamaru Usman's title defenses. Kamaru Usman fought Colby Covington twice, fought Masvidal twice, fought Gilbert Burns, and lost to Leon Edwards. Let's count the win over Tyron Woodley. Let's just say that, okay? So he beat Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, and Gilbert Burns. And then beat Tyron Woodley to get the title. Okay. I can't put that above GSP. GSP, although did come up in a previous era, if we really are going to make that... If you're going to use that argument over, well, he came up in an era that wasn't as good as the modern era, if you're going to do that, although I would argue Masvidal wasn't even ranked, and Masvidal was fighting when GSP was fighting. Masvidal was a journeyman during that time, so really, did the talent sift that much? Like, really did it? But if you're going to use that argument, Anderson Silva isn't as good as Israel. Israel Adesanya is the greatest middleweight to ever live then. Like, if we're going to use that argument over if it's ever close, go with the newest generation and not looking to, well, who did he fight? How many rematches are we doing them? How is his manager getting favorable matchups? How are we doing here? Like, let's not forget that Ali wanted, if Nick Diaz, right? If Nick, not Nate. If Nick Diaz was able to beat Robbie Lawler, Ali Abdelaziz wanted Nick Diaz to fight Kamaru Usman for the title. Okay, like, that's the type of manager we're talking. Like, over a Bilal Muhammad, over a Leon Edwards. Like, that's what we were talking about. So, is it really crazy that Ali Abdelaziz was trying to get as many rematches as possible because he knew Kamaru Usman was going to beat Masvidal a second time? Masvidal wasn't that great. Colby Covington, talented guy. You can make a slight... Actually, I don't even know about the argument about the second fight with Colby Covington. But again, had two fights with Colby Covington. GSP, every rematch that he had were rematches that he lost, and he came in and just absolutely demolished the guy. He had the famous, I am not impressed with your performance against Matt Hughes, a legend of that division. Probably the third best welterweight ever. And GSP beat him. Matt Serra, Matt Serra was one of the craziest upsets in MMA history. Amanda Nunes also had a crazy upset against Juliana Pena. Is Amanda Nunes no longer the best women's MMA fighter because of that? No, she came back and absolutely throttled Pena, the same way that GSP came back and dominated Matt Serra. So, like, every loss that he had, he came back and avenged it. GSP beat 3 separate generations of fighter, and then Tyron Woodley becomes champion, and people thought Tyron Woodley was better than GSP. Like, I do need to remind you, yes, I have a GSP bias, but understand, people have a recency bias. I love Kamaru Usman, dude. Kamaru Usman is the second best welterweight ever. And honestly, probably one of the better champions. Like, in terms of him getting his fights out of the way, getting fights on pay-per-views, getting ready to make these turnarounds. He deserves credit for that. I love GSP. GSP had close fights. GSP was not the most exciting fighter. But at the same time, you can't deny the body of work. He gave the UFC problems, so of course the UFC is going to have a slight bias against him. They wanted him to fight Robert Whittaker, but GSP was not interested in fighting Robert Whittaker and retired because he said he wanted to just do a one-off. Why do you think he wasn't allowed to fight Oscar De La Hoya in a boxing match? Because technically the UFC still has him under contract. They just want to be petty with it. Does it surprise me that Dana White is saying Kamaru Usman? No, because Kamaru Usman took every fight that you gave him. He was paid well for it. But I would also argue the standard for pay for champions is also because GSP fought for that precedent. So give the man his flowers. Kamaru Usman, a lot of his title defenses were just rematches. They were against good talent, and then Jorge Masvidal. And I give him credit for the Gilbert Burns win. Colby Covington's a tough dude. Masvidal, meh. I'm sorry, Masvidal's a meh. Masvidal was fighting during the era of GSP. GSP took years off of his career. He couldn't really cut weight because his body was... GSP has some crazy, physical disorders, okay? He has... the reason that he goes on these crazy fasting bullshit is really it's a health thing. He could not cut the weight, so he goes to a natural weight class in 185 and beats the champion there, that being Michael Bisping. You can make the argument Michael Bisping was not a great fighter, but at the same time, came back and beat him. Fuck ring rust. He looked better than Michael Bisping. If you're going to go with the argument that the previous generation compared to the current generation isn't even comparable, and you're going to put the newer guys above them, okay, let's do that for everybody. Anderson Silva is not better than Israel Adesanya. John Jones, let's look at John Jones again, because Dominic Reyes had a close fight against him and got smoked by Jan, smoked by Yuri. John Jones didn't have to fight them. Never had to fight them. He goes up to heavyweight. Objectively not an as skilled division. Cyril Gane can't grapple. If you're going to play the game of, well, the last generation wasn't as good, and you can to a certain point, but if you're going to do that blanket statement, do that for everybody. But welterweight's a weird one, because everybody who's going to pick Kamaru Usman is going to make that argument. But I would argue, although the generation's slightly better now in welterweight as compared to the generation of GSP, the title reigns between GSP and Kamaru Usman are not comparable in terms of length. Overall, I would say it either equals out, or I'm going to give the edge to GSP because of the multiple generations of people that he's beating. And the fact that he is fighting in this generation when people want... if Kamaru Usman came up when GSP was coming up, he's not magically going to be more skilled. No, we learned from GSP. If GSP came after Kamaru Usman, yeah, GSP has going to have the talent to build off of what Kamaru Usman did. It's a weird argument when you get in there, but yes, no, GSP is the greatest welterweight of all time. Kamaru Usman's number 2. I'm sorry.